Greetings, we are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and in reply to a comment made by a nice person, a kind person, you know who you are, we have taken up your question, what about using the original Koine Greek New Testament? So we came across this book, this translation of that original Koine Greek New Testament. The New Testament of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ, translated out of the Greek. The Koine Greek, being the version set forth AD 1611, compared with the most ancient authorities and revised around 1881. Possibly published in New York, America, 1882. The New Testament in the original Koine Greek. The text revised. It means that it's been looked over again at some point and any errors were corrected. The text revised by Brooke Foss Westcott F.J.A, Canon of Peterborough and Regius Professor of Divinity, Cambridge, and Fenton John Anthony Hort D. Halcyon Professor of Divinity, Cambridge, American edition, with an introduction by Philip Scarf D. Professor in the Union Theological Seminary, New York, President of the American Bible Revision Committee. Okay, yes, publishers. So you're probably familiar with Westcott and Hort, who apparently translated and published the Jehovah's Witnesses New World Translation Bible. And there's supposed to be flack on them, you know, that they were Freemasons and all this other stuff, that they corrupted texts and so forth. You need to go check that out for yourself. Do personal research to verify that that's actually a fact. Okay, that the evidence proves itself evident. Okay, and here is something in Latin by Erasmus. You also need to check out this guy. Do personal research on this guy, because apparently he was a scholar at a well-known university in his era, and also a seducer of young male students. He was caught red-handed in the act by the parents of this particular student. So apparently he shoots off somewhere, runs off somewhere, and makes out he's a womanizer. But later on, in his lifetime, he had written letters, and these are found later on, claimed to be found later on. He was writing letters to a male friend saying, "Oh, why don't you love me? Why can't you love me like you'd love a woman, or with the love of a woman?" And so forth. So again, we advise, go do your personal research on that. We could put a video link to certain people talking about this and so forth, because apparently he may have translated, he really wanted to finish off Jerome's translation of the New Testament, so he worked on that, and he may have added homosexual undertones, like along the lines of that David, before he was the king, kissed his friend Nathan on the lips until he grew large. And apparently the NIV Bible Committee didn't like it because it hinted at something, you know, and they decided to change it. So it went from large, kissed him on the lips until he grew large, to exceedingly. So again, we'll put a link to this particular video with this person talking about that, and having a jolly good time over it. Because also there was one of Saul or Paul, someone like that, on a rooftop and he kissed this guy full on the lips when he greeted him, something like that. Yeah, so again we advise, don't take our word for it, don't take their word for it, go and do your personal research on it and determine if it's an established fact or it's a giant fallacy, because there's a lot of crap on the internet that says this kind of thing, right, as fact. Okay, so we don't know what this says in Latin. We've got a good idea, but we're not going to try and translate it, right, when we're not that well versed in, or even versed in Latin. Publisher's note. Just off the top of our head, yeah, if this is the original Koine Greek, studying the translation of Victor N. Alexander and what he said on his website, this Koine Greek, there was the Aramaic, then there was the Hebrew, and then there was the Koine Greek. So the Koine Greek should be akin, was akin, or should be akin to the original ancient, very old Aramaic, Tav Asherit. So it should have a similar, should be similar to that, right? So we'll have a look at that, because we found something that verifies that these Horton and Westcott were actually incorrect in the particular verse. Publisher's note. The extraordinary interest with which the revised English version of the New Testament has been received, and the universal desire to form a just and intelligent estimate of its value, have prompted the publication of several treatises of a critical or of an explanatory character, dealing with the work of the revisers, its object, and its instruments, its methods, and its results. While such books may be eminently suited to the necessities of the general reader, the purposes of the student and the scholar can be efficiently served only by the text of the New Testament in the original Greek, the original Koine, translated in English, collated in accordance with recognised principles of criticism, probably textual criticism, by men of trained taste and acknowledged abilities. These men with skills, right? The experts, from the best sources accessible at the present time. Such a work is opportunely furnished in the beautiful text of Westcott and Hort. In this edition of the New Testament, which has been prepared by the publishers at the suggestion of several eminent scholars, these are known, profound scholars, right? They're not scholars who got their degrees out of cornflakes packets. Okay, so these eminent scholars, the revised English version has been arranged so as to correspond as nearly as possible, page by page, with Westcott and Hort's Greek text, the two works being printed on opposite pages. This arrangement has rendered necessary in the English portion a partial departure from the order of books adopted by the revisers, as well as the transposition of a certain passage in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 7:53, chapter 8:11, verse 11. To the end of that Gospel. In other respects, the English portion of the work is identical with the revised version as issued by the publishers. Okay, so they did that Americanized Bible version, the revised version, probably the RSV, except that a translation has been added of the alternative ending of the Gospel of St. Mark. So they've added a translation. Okay, the alternative ending of the Gospel of St. Mark, while the revisers' preface has been omitted, with a view to keep the size of the book within convenient limits. The Greek has been printed from plates containing the final corrections of the editors, and the English from the type used in the breviary editions of the revised version issued by the publishers. It is hoped that by facilitating comparisons between the latest English translation and the purest and most recent Greek text of the New Testament, this edition will win for itself a useful and conspicuous place among the practical apparatus of the student and the biblical scholar. Harper and Brothers, they're the publishers. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to compare it with the ancient original Aramaic, Galilean-Aramaic manuscripts, which were hidden from Roman Catholics, Constantine, the then Mohammedans or Muslims, etc. For 2,000 years they were hidden and preserved by the original ancient Apostolic Church of the East, founded by Thomas and Adai, etc. and were verified as intact, hadn't been messed with by a former patriarch of that church, who was the head of it in 1975, who was later assassinated by a Kurd in he was head patriarch of that church in 1957, and he was assassinated in 1975 by a Kurd. Okay. Isai Shimon. Okay, so we're going to compare it with that. And we've got other ones. Gospel of Matthew 2, 3, 4, okay, and Matthew 27, chapter 46. So we're going to go back to this book. Introduction to the American edition by Philip Schaff. Merits of the edition. The 17th day of May 1881 marks an epoch in the history of the New Testament. It is the birthday both of the purest English translation and of the purest Greek text of that little book which contains the inspired message of God's wisdom and love to mankind, and which forms the highest standard of Christian faith and duty. The coincidence is remarkable. The original and the translation were matured during the same long period by harmonious though independent cooperation. The editors of the Greek text were members of the English New Testament Company of Revisers. The English and American revisers had the confidential use of advanced proof sheets of this edition of the Greek text as they proceeded, and the translations is perhaps more clearly conform to it than to any other printed edition of Erasmus, and bears it down to Tischendorf and Tregelles. The Textus Receptus, so called, was announced to the world by the Leyden publishers in 1633 with the bold declaration, Textum ergo abes nunc ab omnibus receptum. The translator here says he ventures to this is Philip Schaff. He ventures to introduce the Greek Testament of Westcott and Hort with the modest assertion, it's in Latin again, it is based exclusively on documentary evidence and on the most careful comparison of all the ancient sources of the text as they have been collected and made available by the indefatigable diligence of former editors, especially of Lachmann, Tischendorf and Tregelles. It embodies the results of the combined labours of more than a quarter of a century. It will of course not supersede the large editions which contain the whole critical apparatus, but it will take its rank as at once among the best standard editions of the Greek Testament. So they have some sort of asterisk or footnote or note indication here. Okay. The Saturday Review of London for May 21, 1881 must be some sort of publication, and a notice of the revised version of the New Testament incidentally mentions this Greek edition with the remark, the Clarendon Press volume Archdeacon Palmer's Greek test is beautifully printed, though this again is eclipsed by the exquisite edition of Dr. Westcott's and Dr. Hort's Greek text, issued by the Pitt Press on the same 17th of May, a day to be much remembered by biblical critics. This last work, formed exclusively on documentary evidence without reference to any printed text, has been long expected by scholars. It is probably the most important contribution to biblical learning in our generation. The revisers, it is understood, had the advantage of consulting it during the progress of their work. Philip Schaff became personally acquainted with the editors and their work, Westcott and Hort probably, 12 years ago at Harrow in 1869, and saw them afterwards repeatedly at Cambridge, London and Peterborough. He formed such a favourable opinion of the value of their labours that he engaged from them and their publisher, Mr. Macmillan, duplicate plates for an American edition, which is now published by the Messengers, Harpers and Brothers. Not too sure if that means Messengers. There's a note here. The letter of the Messrs. Harper in which they accepted his proposition is dated May 17, 1871, on the same day of the same month on which the book was published 10 years afterwards in London. But as Westcott and Hort did not contemplate a critical apparatus below the text, he made subsequently an agreement with his friend Professor Tischendorf for the preparation of an American edition containing his own latest with a very brief digest of his critical apparatus, somewhat similar to his Editio Critica Minor, or minor critical edition, only more condensed and confined to the oldest readings, for the use of students thinking that there would be room for 2 editions, each having its special merits. Tischendorf actually began the work in 1873, and several sheets were set up at Leipzig when his death in December 1874. It might be Leipzig ended his. When his death in December 1874 ended his earthly labours, preventing him from even preparing the Prolegomena to his 8th critical edition. Schaff knows of no scholars who could better carry out the plans of such an edition than Professor Dr. Ezra Abbott in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Dr. Caspar Rene Gregory in Leipzig. Okay. This opinion ripened into conviction by constant use since 1870 of proof sheets of this text in his edition of Lang's Commentary on John. See the critical notes in his exegetical lectures and in his labours as a member of the revision committee. Doctors Westcott and Hort are ranked in England among the best Greek and biblical scholars of the age. Okay, so they were ranked the best at that time. Dr. Hort, educated at Rugby School and Trinity College, Cambridge, is Hossein Professor of Divinity, and goes on about him. He's probably more familiar with the textual history of the Greek Testament than any other man living. He exerted great influence in the revision company on all matters of reading. His 2 dissertations on whatever that is, and on the Constantinopolitan Creed, 1876, evince a rare degree of patristic learning and critical acumen. Evince, you have to look up that word. Probably prove him to be having a rare degree of patristic learning and critical acumen. Yeah, they use some really old, bizarre words in those 1800s. Dr. Westcott, born 1825, educated at Trinity College, Cambridge, is Regius Professor. We read through all that. He is the author of several able and useful works as a history of the English Bible, history of the canon of the New Testament, and an introduction to the study of the Gospels, and a commentary on the Gospel of John, which ranks among the best part of the speaker's commentary. These 2 scholars have been in constant correspondence with each other and kept a journal of their discussions of all the important textual questions. Few works have ever been prepared with so much labour, care and devotion as this edition of the Greek Testament, begun in 1853 and finished in 1881. The introduction and appendix, which the editors promised to publish shortly in a separate volume, which they actually did, will contain a full exposition of the principles and results of textual criticism. Without anticipating the elaborate treatise which Philip Schaff had not seen at that point, he proposed, with their consent, to furnish the readers of this volume with such preliminary information as is necessary for an intelligent use of this or any other critical edition of the Greek Testament. The literature, the chief authorities for the topics discussed in this introduction are the following works. There's a list of them there. Wettstein, Griesbach, Lachmann, Tischendorf, and more. Probably well known in that day. There's some more here. The Prolegomena to Tischendorf's 8th critical edition and introduction and appendix of Westcott and Hort may be referred to in advance as promising the latest and most accurate information on textual criticism applied to the New Testament. Yeah, look up textual criticism. There could be some cons and pros to that. It's a method many use today, modern scholars, revisionists, etc. Sources of the text of the New Testament. The original autographs, autographa, which is in the Greek, of the apostolic writings are lost beyond all reasonable hope of discovery and are not even mentioned by the post-apostolic authors as being extant anywhere or as having been seen by them. on the disputed passage of Tertullian, who speaks of ipsae authenticae, etc., etc. See Scrivener at page 446. Okay, the original autographs of the apostolic writings are lost beyond all reasonable hope of discovery, and are not even mentioned by the post-apostolic authors as being extant anywhere, or as having been seen by them. Might help if I had glasses. They perished probably before the close of the 1st century with the brittle paper then in ordinary use, the Egyptian papyrus. Like all other ancient writings, with the exception of a few that were accidentally preserved in Egyptian tombs and mummies, or under the lava of Vesuvius at Herculaneum in Pompeii, God has not chosen to exempt the Bible by a miracle from the fate of other books, but has wisely left room for the diligence and research of God has not chosen to exempt the Bible by a miracle from the fate of other books, but has wisely left room for the diligence and research of man, who is responsible for the use of all the facilities within his reach for the study of the Bible. He has not provided for inspired transcribers any more than inspired printers, nor for infallible translators any more than infallible commentators and readers. He wastes no miracles. He desires free and intelligent worshippers. The letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. The Bible in its origin and history is a human as well as the divine book, and must be studied under this twofold aspect. It is the incarnation of God's truth and reflects the divine human person of Christ. That means the hypostasis. He is two substances. He's of two natures, both divine and human, as it's stated here. It is the incarnation of God's truth and reflects the divine human person of Christ, to whom it bears witness as the Alpha and Omega, as the way, the truth and life. And this hypostasis, this twofold nature of Christ, was firstly an argument or debate between Nestorius and Cyril, who wanted to be the bishop of all bishops, and he realised that Nestorius would be, so he got all jealous and started telling lies about him. And then, because of that statement, the hypostasis, or the two natures of Christ, two substances, he was called a heretic, etc., etc. The original Apostolic Church of the East piped up and says, yeah, we also believe that, except that what he said was true. It's true, because we've been saying that 1,000 years in their history before him. So they also got labelled heretics, persecuted, went through all this genocide, martyrdom, etc., etc., for 18 centuries. Still getting it in the neck today. And they were erroneously called the Nestorians, the Church of Nestorian, or Nestorius, which is actually wrong. Okay? He was not their founder. And as we said in a former video, one of the patriarchs had an interview or a debate with another person who kept calling them Nestorians, the Nestorian Church. He says, well, if we keep doing that, we're going to have to go to war. Okay, so on with this. Even if we had the apostolic autographs, there would be room for verbal criticism, since they, like other ancient books, were written as a continuous whole, without accents, without punctuation, without division of sentences or words, without titles and subscriptions, without even the name of the author, unless it was part of the text itself. Yeah, apparently Jews added names because it was part of their tradition, to do so. Okay, let's have a look at that again. Even if we had the apostolic autographs, we actually do. You could say they probably weren't the originals, but they were like hand-copied copies of those, right? From the 1st century to the 4th. Even like the Old Testament manuscripts. They were hand copied copies. Okay, we don't know that as a ministry that they actually have those original manuscripts. Well, supposedly they do. They were handed over by Thomas, who founded that original apostolic church, to the priests of that church, who then hid them, therefore preserving them for 2,000 years. And supposedly from that patriarch, Ma Isa Shamun, he stated that from the day that the manuscripts, those original manuscripts, texts, were handed over by the blessed hands of the disciples to that day, he's talking about it in 1957, it was intact. It was never messed with. So that gives us that impression, that fact, that these were the original autographs, right? Not copies of it, of an original. And they had no need to translate it into other foreign languages, because they just, the priests knew that language. And they read it. It's just a liturgy, right? They read it from their churches, to their mass, right? Who understood that language as well. So they never had any reason to revise it, add to it, take away, all that sort of stuff. And that's why today it's said to be intact. It's never been messed with. And they probably won't want to translate it into English anyway, or any other foreign language. But Victor N. Alexander, a native-born Aramaic-speaking translator from Bet Narain, or Mesopotamia, Syria, got hold of a copy from a priest, and he found a method to translate the old dead language into English, the old Galilean-Aramaic, which is pretty close to the Ninevite Aramaic, apparently. Yeah, we've done the research. We might get the words around the wrong way, but if you get hold of him and ask him through his email or whatever, that would be great. Okay, he'll clear that up for you.